He celebrated winning the divorce. Moments before his wife's assets were revealed, the judge cleared his throat. That sound alone told me how this was supposed to end. "This court has reviewed the filings," he said, voice steady, practiced, already drifting toward my husband's side of the room, "and sees no reason to delay today's ruling." A low murmur rolled through the gallery. Richard didn't look at me. He didn't need to. His attorney, Victor Hale, no relation, just an unfortunate coincidence, smiled as if the paperwork had already turned into money. He stood with his hands folded, confident, relaxed. A man who had never walked into a courtroom, unsure of the outcome. I sat alone at the narrow table to the left. No family behind me. No whispered encouragement. No hand reaching for mine. Just me, straight-backed, hands folded, quiet. The woman everyone had already decided was about to lose. Given the uncontested nature of the marital assets, the judge continued, uncontested. The word landed in my chest like something sharp. Behind Richard, Chantal leaned forward. Her manicured hand rested lightly on his shoulder, nails pale pink, deliberate, claiming. She wore cream today, soft, innocent, the color women choose when they want to look harmless. She met my eyes and smiled, not nervous, not apologetic, victorious. Richard finally turned toward me then. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "You should be grateful," he murmured. "This could have been much worse for you." I didn't answer. My lawyer, Elaine Carter, tapped her pen once. Then again. I knew that rhythm. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Hale, you understand that by declining to contest these assets, you are waiving any future claims." "Yes, Your Honor," I said softly. Several heads turned. I felt it immediately. That shift, the look people get when they decide who you are in a single glance. Poor woman, clueless wife, didn't even try. The judge nodded, satisfied. "Very well." Richard exhaled, shoulders loosening for the first time all morning. His knee bounced beneath the table, like a man waiting for permission to leave early. Victor gathered his papers, already moving toward closure. Chantal squeezed Richard's shoulder, her smile tightening, controlled. The clerk reached for the final document. That was when I noticed the timestamp. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a wrong. I leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing. The numbers didn't match the court filing sequence. They were off by hours, enough to matter. Elaine's pen stopped tapping. She glanced at me. I didn't nod, didn't react. The judge continued. "The court therefore finds—" "Your Honor," the clerk said quietly. The room froze. Richard frowned. "What is it now?" The clerk swallowed. "There appears to be a discrepancy in the record." Victor scoffed. "This is a clerical issue. We've already reviewed." "Let her finish," the judge said, raising a hand. The clerk turned the screen slightly. "The timestamp on this trust transfer doesn't align with the court's electronic filing system." A ripple moved through the gallery. Richard laughed. Too fast. Too light. "That's impossible," he said. "That trust was established after separation. Cleanly." The judge looked at him for the first time. Really looked. "Mrs. Hale," he said, turning back to me, "do you wish to add anything before we proceed?" Every eye landed on me. This was the moment they expected tears, confusion, regret. I met Richard's gaze. He was still smiling, barely. "I've been very patient," I said quietly, "and I'm done pretending I don't understand what he did." Silence crashed down. Hard. Chantal's hand slipped from Richard's shoulder, and for the first time since this began, my husband looked afraid. People think betrayal is loud. They imagine shouting, plates breaking, doors slamming so hard the walls shake. Mine wasn't like that. Mine happened quietly, while I was still setting the table, while I still believed we were a team. "Julia, you don't have to wait up," Richard said one night, shrugging into his coat. "It's just a late meeting." I nodded. "Do you want dinner saved?" He hesitated. "Just long enough to matter. Don't bother." In the courtroom, Victor's voice cut cleanly through my memory. Mrs. Hale had no direct involvement in the acquisition or management of these assets. I blinked. No involvement. Victor paced slowly, hands clasped behind his back like a lecturer. She held no executive title, signed no contracts, attended no board meetings. Richard stared straight ahead, didn't look at me. "Is that accurate?" the judge asked, glancing in my direction. I could have said no. I could have told him about the nights Richard came home exhausted, dumping spreadsheets onto the kitchen table. "Can you check this?" he'd ask. "You're better with details." I'd highlight discrepancies, flag risks, suggest structures. "Smart," he'd say. "I don't know what I'd do without you." But I said nothing now. I folded my hands tighter instead. "Yes, Your Honor," I said finally. "That's accurate." Victor smiled, satisfied. Behind him, Chantal shifted in her seat. She wore a fitted blazer today, professional, respectable, the kind of woman who looked like she belonged in rooms I was no longer invited into. The judge nodded. "And you agree the proposed settlement is fair?" Fair. The word tasted bitter. Elaine leaned toward me, her voice barely a whisper. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I whispered back. That wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. Victor continued. "Given Mrs. Hale's limited contribution, the settlement reflects generosity rather than obligation." Richard finally turned toward me. His eyes held something like impatience. "Just answer," his look said. "Let this end." The judge cleared his throat again. "Mrs. Hale?" I met his gaze. "I agree to the settlement." A soft gasp rippled through the gallery. Someone behind me whispered, "She didn't even try." Chantal exhaled slowly, relief smoothing her features. She leaned forward and murmured to Richard, not quietly enough, "I told you she wouldn't fight." Richard's jaw tightened, not with anger, but annoyance. "Good," he muttered. "Let's finish this." As Victor returned to his seat, my mind drifted, not to grief, but to math, dates, times, patterns. I remembered the first time Richard stopped asking my opinion. "What do you think?" had become, "I've already decided." It happened around the same time Chantal started working late. "She's just efficient," he said when I mentioned it. "You're reading too much into things." I believed him. I always believed him. In court, the financial expert took the stand. A thin man, gray suit, careful words. Mr. Hale's wealth was accumulated primarily through independent ventures, he testified. Mrs. Hale was not financially intertwined. Elaine stood. "So, Mrs. Hale had no knowledge of these ventures?" The expert hesitated. "Not in any meaningful capacity." I looked down at my hands. I remembered opening the first offshore account because Richard was traveling. "Just sign for me," he'd said over the phone. "I trust you." I remembered him sliding documents towards me late at night. "Can you read this? Make sure there's nothing stupid in it." But that wasn't meaningful capacity. That was invisible labor. The judge leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Hale, do you dispute the expert's assessment? Every muscle in my body tensed. Elaine glanced at me, searching my face. I shook my head slightly. No, Your Honor. The expert relaxed. Victor smiled again. Richard exhaled like a man finally dropping a weight. That was when the clerk cleared her throat, softly, nervously. Your Honor? Yes, the judge said. The trust document submitted earlier. There's a timing inconsistency. Victor stiffened. We've addressed this. The clerk swallowed. It was created on a Sunday. The room stilled. Richard frowned. So? The filing system was offline that day, she said carefully. Yet the timestamp shows a confirmation number. Elaine straightened. Victor snapped. That's irrelevant. The date of separation was a Monday, the judge finished. I know. He turned to the expert. Can you explain the discrepancy? The expert hesitated. Just a second. But I saw it. Chantal leaned toward Richard, whispering urgently, What does that mean? It's nothing, Richard hissed. Sit back. But his knees started bouncing again. The judge looked at me. Mrs. Hale, did you authorize this trust? I lifted my head. This was it, the moment they expected me to falter. I helped create it, I said. The gallery stirred. Richard snapped his head toward me. What? Elaine's eyes widened just slightly. I signed documents, I continued, at my husband's request. Victor shot to his feet. Objection! Sit down, the judge said sharply. Richard's face flushed. You said you agreed to the settlement. I did, I replied calmly, based on what you disclosed. Silence stretched. Chantal stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. You're just bitter. I looked at her then, really looked. No, I said. I'm just finished being quiet. The judge leaned forward, and for the first time that day, his voice carried interest instead of routine. Proceed, he said. Richard stood so fast, his chair scraped loudly against the floor. That's not what you said, he snapped, pointing at me. You agreed. I agreed to what you presented, I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Not to what you hid. Victor was already beside him. Your Honor, this is turning into theatrics. Mrs. Hale confirmed moments ago. I confirmed I understood, I said. Not that I was ignorant. The judge raised a hand. Mr. Hale, sit down. Richard hesitated. For a moment, I thought he might argue. Then he sat. Hard. The judge turned to the financial expert. Explain the Sunday filing. The expert adjusted his tie. It's possible the document was prepared earlier and uploaded later. Elaine leaned forward. Prepared earlier than the date of separation? Yes, he said quickly. Potentially. I let out a quiet breath. No. Every head turned toward me again. Richard stared like he didn't recognize me. No? The judge asked. It wasn't prepared earlier, I said. It was executed that Sunday. Victor snapped. You can't possibly know that. I met his gaze. I was there. Silence. Elaine didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Her hands were already moving through her folder. Richard laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. You're lying. I signed the papers, I said. In our living room. The memory rose, uninvited. Richard pacing, phone pressed to his ear. Transfer it now, he'd said. No delays. I'd been on the couch, laptop open. Can you print something for me? He'd asked casually. I need a witness signature. I'd looked at the date then. Sunday. The banks are closed, I'd said. It's fine, he replied. Everything's automated. Back in the courtroom, Chantal whispered furiously, You told me this was clean. Richard didn't answer her. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Hale, why didn't you raise this earlier? I swallowed. Because I needed him to feel safe first. Because no one asked, I said simply. And because I was advised to listen before speaking. Elaine finally stood. Your Honor, may I submit Exhibit C? Victor spun. We object. Overruled, the judge said. Elaine handed the document to the clerk. This is a copy of the trust agreement. The signature block includes Mrs. Hale's signature and a timestamp confirming execution on the Sunday prior to the separation filing. The clerk reviewed it, then nodded. The judge's jaw tightened. Mr. Hale, is this your signature? Richard hesitated. Just long enough. Yes, he said. But that doesn't mean... And this? The judge asked, pointing. Your wife's? Richard turned to me. His eyes were sharp now, angry. You had no right, he said through clenched teeth. I met his stare. You told me it was business. Victor interjected, voice rising. Even if this were true, it doesn't alter ownership. The trust was created during the marriage, Elaine cut in, with marital funds. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Chantal stood again. This is insane. She's twisting things. The judge slammed his gavel. Sit down. She froze. Slowly, she sat. Richard leaned toward me, his voice low and furious. You planned this. No, I said. You did. That was when I saw it. The realization. Not fear, not yet. Understanding. You waited, he said quietly. You let me think you were weak. I didn't answer. The judge turned to the expert. Did you review this trust before testifying? The expert's eyes darted to Victor. Yes, he said, briefly. Then why did you testify it was post-separation? The expert swallowed. That was my understanding. From whom? The judge asked. Another pause. Victor stood. Your Honor, sit. Down. Victor sat. The expert cleared his throat. From Mr. Hale. Richard slammed his palm on the table. This is ridiculous. The judge's voice hardened. Mr. Hale, control yourself. Elaine spoke calmly. Your Honor, this establishes intent. Assets were transferred in anticipation of divorce, without disclosure, and with Mrs. Hale's participation under misrepresentation. Chantal whispered, You said she was stupid. Richard snapped, Not now. The judge leaned back, studying me. Mrs. Hale, he said, why did you sign? I thought of all the years I'd believed him. I trusted my husband, I said, and when I realized I'd been used, I paid attention. The judge nodded slowly. Then he looked at Richard. This court will recess for 15 minutes, he said. When we return, we will address asset concealment. The gavel struck. Richard turned to me, his face pale now. You think you've won? I stood, gathering my bag. I think you finally see me. He stared as I walked past him. Chantal didn't look up, and for the first time since this divorce began, I felt the power shift. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. I stood near the wall, arms crossed, listening to Richard argue in hushed, furious tones with Victor a few feet away. You said this was airtight, Richard hissed. It was, Victor snapped back, until she opened her mouth. Elaine stepped beside me. You okay? I am, I said. That surprised me. It was true. Richard turned suddenly, spotting us. He walked over fast, anger barely contained. You ambushed me, he said. You let me think. I let you talk, I replied. There's a difference. Victor cut in. This recess is procedural. Don't get comfortable. Elaine smiled faintly. We're very comfortable. Richard leaned closer, lowering his voice. You don't understand what you're doing. This could get ugly. I met his eyes. It already was. You just weren't the one bleeding. For a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Not remorse. Fear. Chantal burst out of the courtroom doors then, phone in hand, mascara smudged. "You told me she signed everything," she said sharply. "You told me she was done." Richard grabbed her arm. "Not here." She shook him off. "You promised." I watched them from a distance, oddly calm. Elaine followed my gaze. "You didn't tell me about her." "You didn't ask," I said. Elaine nodded once. "Fair." The bailiff called us back inside. As we took our seats, I noticed the shift immediately. The judge wasn't relaxed anymore. He didn't shuffle papers or glance at the clock. He sat upright, hands folded, eyes alert. "This court has concerns," he said evenly. "Concerns about disclosure, timing, and intent." Victor stood. "Your Honor, with respect. Speculation?" "This is not speculation," the judge cut in. "This is pattern." The word hung heavy in the room. Richard stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. "Mrs. Hale," the judge continued, "you have been notably silent until now. Why?" Every eye turned to me. I felt my pulse steady. "Because I needed him to believe his version," I said. "If I interrupted, he would have adjusted." Victor scoffed. "That's absurd." The judge didn't look at him. "Is it?" Elaine stood. "Your Honor, we request permission to question the defendant directly regarding asset transfers." Victor objected instantly. "Absolutely not." "Overruled," the judge said. "Proceed." Elaine turned to Richard. "Mr. Hale, did you instruct your wife to sign trust documents on the Sunday before filing for divorce?" Richard hesitated. "Yes," he said, "but—" "And did you disclose to her that this was in anticipation of divorce?" "No," he snapped, "because it wasn't." I spoke calmly. "You told me it was for tax protection." Chantal let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, please." The judge turned to her. "Ms. Chantal, you are not a party to this case." She shut her mouth. Elaine continued. "Mr. Hale, did you move any other assets prior to filing?" "No," I said quietly. "Yes." Richard's head whipped toward me. "Stop!" The judge leaned forward. "Mrs. Hale?" "There was a holding company," I said, "named after our anniversary. You moved intellectual property into it 3 weeks before filing." Victor slammed his hand on the table. "This is hearsay." Elaine slid another document forward. "Exhibit D." The clerk reviewed it. Richard's breathing changed. Faster, shallower. "You named it JH-14, I continued. "June 14th. You always thought I wouldn't notice." The judge looked at Richard. "Is this accurate?" Richard swallowed. "I don't recall." "That's interesting," the judge said, "because the signatures are clear." Chantal whispered, "You said she didn't know anything." Richard snapped, "Enough." The judge's voice dropped. "Mr. Hale, you are under oath." The room went quiet. "I need a moment," Richard said, "to consult with counsel." The judge nodded. "Granted." Richard leaned toward Victor, whispering furiously. Elaine leaned toward me. "You're doing great." "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm just answering." She smiled. "That's the most dangerous thing you could do." Richard stood again. "Your Honor, we're prepared to amend the settlement." I raised an eyebrow. Victor shot him a look. "Richard?" "I'll increase the offer," Richard said quickly. "Substantially." The judge studied him. "Why?" Richard's eyes flicked to me. "To resolve this amicably." I shook my head. "I'm not interested." Victor stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "You should reconsider," Richard said tightly. This won't end the way you think. I leaned forward slightly. It already has. The judge held up a hand. This court is not interested in rushed settlements designed to obscure facts. Richard clenched his fists. Mrs. Hale, the judge said, do you believe there are additional undisclosed assets? Yes, I said. Then we will find them, the judge replied. Something inside me loosened. Not relief, validation. Richard finally looked at me, not as a problem, not as a mistake, but as an opponent. And for the first time in years, that felt like respect. The judge adjusted his glasses again. It was a small movement, but I noticed it. He only did that when he was preparing to listen carefully. Mr. Hale, he said, you will remain seated while the court examines the matter of undisclosed assets. Richard didn't argue this time. He sank back into his chair, jaw tight, eyes fixed forward. Elaine stood slowly. Your Honor, we request permission to recall the financial expert. Victor shot up. We've already heard from him. And now we have reason to hear from him, honestly, Elaine replied. The judge nodded. Granted. The expert returned to the stand, visibly less confident than before. His earlier smoothness was gone. He adjusted the microphone twice before speaking. State your name again for the record, the judge said. Daniel Cross, he replied. Elaine stepped closer. Mr. Cross, when you reviewed Mr. Hale's financial disclosures, were you given full access to all holding companies? Yes, he said quickly. I leaned forward. No, you weren't. Victor snapped. Objection! The judge raised a finger. Let her speak. Mr. Cross's eyes flicked to Richard. Were you given access to JH-14 Holdings? Elaine asked. He hesitated. I don't recall. That's not what I asked, Elaine said gently. Yes or no? No, he said finally. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Elaine nodded. Were you informed that JH-14 held intellectual property developed during the marriage? No. Richard's hands curled into fists. Elaine continued. So when you testified that all marital assets had been disclosed, that was based on incomplete information? Yes, Mr. Cross admitted. It appears so. Victor's voice cut in sharply. Your Honor, this is turning into conjecture. The judge leaned forward. No, this is turning into clarification. He turned to the expert. Who provided you with the asset list? Mr. Cross swallowed. Mr. Hale. Richard exploded. That's enough! The judge's gavel came down hard. One more outburst, Mr. Hale, and you will be removed. The room went silent. Elaine stepped back. No further questions. The judge looked at Richard again. Mr. Hale, do you wish to correct the record? Richard stood slowly, straightening his jacket. He looked around the room like a man searching for allies. There was no intent to deceive, he said. Any omissions were clerical. I let out a quiet laugh before I could stop myself. Richard snapped toward me. What's funny? Clerical mistakes don't usually repeat themselves, I said. Not across 3 accounts. Victor hissed. Julia. The judge raised his hand. Mrs. Hale is not your client. Elaine turned to me. Can you explain how you know about the other accounts? I nodded. Because I helped open them. Richard shook his head. You're twisting this. No, I said. I'm remembering. The judge leaned in. Then remember carefully. I closed my eyes for a moment. I signed documents for an account in Singapore, I said. One in Zurich, and one under a shell company registered in Delaware. Victor slammed his folder shut. This is absurd. Why would she wait until now? The judge answered for me. Oh, because timing matters. He turned back to Richard. Why did you exclude these from disclosure? Richard's voice dropped. Because they weren't hers. They were created during the marriage, the judge replied, using marital resources. Chantal suddenly stood. He did this for us. Everyone turned. Richard froze. Sit down. She ignored him. He said once the divorce was final, everything would be clean, that she wouldn't get anything else. The courtroom gasped. Richard lunged toward her. Stop talking. The judge banged the gavel. Ms. Chantal, sit down immediately. She did, trembling. Richard stared straight ahead now, face drained of color. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Hale, when did you realize the divorce was planned in advance? I didn't hesitate. When I found the burner phone. Richard's head snapped toward me. You went through my things? You left it in the garage, I said. Under the paint cans. Elaine raised her eyebrows but said nothing. The judge sighed slowly. This court is now convinced there was deliberate concealment. Victor stood, pale. Your Honor, we request a private conference. Denied, the judge said. This court will not shield misconduct. Richard finally looked at me fully. Not angry, panicked. You don't know what you're doing, he whispered. I met his eyes. I know exactly what I'm doing. The judge leaned back, steepling his fingers. This changes everything. And I knew then. The room was no longer on his side. The room felt different after that. Heavier, quieter, like everyone had leaned forward at the same time. The judge removed his glasses and set them carefully on the bench. That was how I knew this was no longer routine for him. This court will now address the full scope of undisclosed assets, he said. Mrs. Hale, you will answer clearly and only what is asked. I nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Richard stared straight ahead. He hadn't moved since Chantal spoke. His face was stiff, like he was holding something in place that wanted to break. Elaine stood beside me. Julia, can you explain how the Delaware Shell Company was created? I took a breath. Richard asked me to register it because he was traveling. He said it was for licensing purposes. When? Elaine asked. 3 weeks before he filed for divorce. Victor muttered. Unbelievable. The judge cut him a look. You will remain silent unless addressed. Elaine continued. And who owned the intellectual property placed inside that company? Richard, I said. At first. Elaine tilted her head. At first? Then it was transferred, I said, to the company. And who controlled the company? She asked. I looked at Richard. He did, I said. On paper. The judge leaned forward. And in reality? I swallowed. Me. A collective inhale swept through the courtroom. Richard finally moved. He turned toward me slowly, eyes wide. You never had control, he said sharply. You don't know what you're talking about. I met his gaze. You gave me the access codes. That doesn't mean. You were locked out, I said quietly. For 6 months. Victor shot to his feet. Your Honor. The judge raised a hand. Sit. Elaine asked gently. Why were you given control, Julia? I didn't answer immediately. Because the truth wasn't flattering. Because he didn't want responsibility, I said. He trusted me to manage it, while he focused on appearances. The judge nodded slowly. Richard's voice cracked. You said you didn't care about the business. I said I didn't want credit, I replied. There's a difference. Elaine turned to the clerk. May we submit Exhibit F? The clerk took the document, eyes widening as she scanned it. The judge frowned. "What am I looking at?" "Transfer confirmations," Elaine said, "showing that the defendant no longer had unilateral access to the accounts at the time of filing." Richard stood abruptly. "That's not true." The judge's voice was sharp. "Sit down." Richard didn't. "I built everything," he said, voice rising. "Everything I have is mine." The judge stared at him. "You built it with marital funds and with your wife's involvement." Richard laughed bitterly. "She's rewriting history." I shook my head. "I kept records." Elaine slid another document forward. "Logan logs, IP addresses, timestamps." The judge scanned them. Then he looked at Richard again. "You transferred control away from yourself before filing for divorce," he said slowly. "Why?" Richard opened his mouth, closed it. Chantal whispered, "Say something." He didn't. The judge continued, "Was this to prevent your wife from claiming ownership?" Richard finally spoke. "It was to protect the company." "From whom?" the judge asked. Richard looked at me. "From her," he said. Something inside my chest tightened. Not pain, finality. The judge sighed. "That answer tells me more than you intended." Elaine stepped back, letting the silence stretch. Then the judge turned to the expert witness again. "Mr. Cross," he said, "had you known the defendant lacked control of these assets at the time of filing, would that have changed your assessment?" "Yes," Mr. Cross said immediately. Significantly. "How?" the judge asked. "They would be considered marital property subject to equitable division." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "This is insane." The judge's gavel came down. "That's enough." Richard froze. "This court finds there is substantial evidence of intentional concealment," the judge said, "and potential perjury." The word echoed, perjury. Chantal gasped softly. "Richard—" He didn't look at her. He was looking at me. "You planned this," he said hoarsely. I shook my head. "I survived it." Elaine leaned toward me. "One more question." She turned to the judge. "Your Honor, may Mrs. Hale explain why she waited?" The judge nodded. I took a breath. "I waited because if I'd spoken earlier, he would have adjusted," I said. "He always does." I needed him comfortable. Richard's shoulders sagged. The judge leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "Mrs. Hale, do you understand the implications of what you've revealed?" "Yes," I said, "I do." "And you chose to proceed anyway?" "Yes." The judge nodded once. "Then this court will order a full forensic audit of all assets," he said, "effective immediately." A gasp ran through the room. Victor's face went pale. Richard whispered, "You've ruined me." I met his eyes. "You ruined yourself." The judge struck the gavel again. "Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning." People began to stand. Whisper, "Move." I stayed seated for a moment longer, because for the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was watching the consequences unfold. The next morning, the courtroom felt colder. Not in temperature, in attitude. People avoided Richard's eyes now. The casual confidence he once carried had evaporated, replaced by tight shoulders and shallow breaths. Elaine leaned toward me. "Forensic auditors are already pulling records." I nodded. "How long?" "Not long," she said. "He didn't hide things patiently. He hid them fast." Richard sat 2 tables away, whispering urgently to Victor. Their heads were close, voices sharp. "This is a witch hunt," Richard hissed. Victor's reply was low and strained. "It's a consequence," Richard snapped. "Fix it." Victor didn't answer. The judge entered, and the room rose. "Be seated," he said, voice firm. "We will begin with preliminary findings." That alone told me everything. Preliminary. They hadn't even dug deep yet. A court-appointed auditor took the stand. Calm, precise, unimpressed. "Please summarize your findings," the judge instructed. "Yes, Your Honor," the auditor said. "Multiple accounts were omitted from disclosure. Several were actively used after the filing date." Richard shook his head. "That's not true." The judge didn't look at him. "Some assets were moved during the audit itself," the auditor continued, "which suggests awareness." The gallery murmured. Elaine leaned toward me. "That's bad." I watched Richard's face drain of color. Victor stood. "Your Honor, my client maintains he acted on advice of counsel." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Which counsel?" Victor paused. "Irrelevant," the judge said. "Ignorance is not absolution." The auditor went on. "Additionally, we found communications indicating intent to minimize marital exposure." The judge looked up. "Communications?" "Yes," the auditor replied. "Emails, texts." Richard stood abruptly. "Those are private. They are relevant," the judge said calmly. "Sit down." Richard didn't. "I built my life from nothing," he said loudly, "and now I'm being punished for protecting it." I felt the room turn against him. The judge finally looked directly at him. "You are not being punished for protecting your life. You are being examined for lying to this court." Silence fell. Elaine stood. "Your Honor, may Mrs. Hale speak?" The judge nodded. I rose slowly. "I didn't come here to destroy him," I said. "I came because I was erased." Richard scoffed. "You're enjoying this." "No," I said. "I'm finishing it." A soft gasp came from somewhere behind me. The judge turned to Richard. "Mr. Hale, this court no longer finds your testimony reliable." That sentence landed harder than any ruling. Richard blinked. "What? This court will proceed under the assumption that prior statements may be false unless corroborated." Victor's face went ashen. Chantal stood suddenly. "He didn't mean," the judge cut her off. "Miss Chantal, you will remain silent." She sat, trembling. Richard looked at Victor. "Say something." Victor didn't. The judge continued. "Given these findings, the court is reconsidering the entire settlement." Richard's voice cracked. "You can't do that." "I can," the judge said, "and I am." For the first time, Richard looked truly lost. He turned toward me, eyes searching. "Julia." I met his gaze. "I waited years for you to hear me," I said quietly. "This is the sound of that silence breaking." The judge struck the gavel. "This court will recess for deliberation." As people stood, Richard remained seated. Elaine touched my arm. "You okay?" I nodded. Across the room, Richard finally stood. He walked toward me slowly. "You didn't have to go this far," he said. I looked at him, really looked. "You went far first," I replied. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For once he had nothing left to say. They asked to see me privately. Not the judge, not the court. Richard. Elaine glanced at me. "You don't have to." "I know," I said, "but I want to." They gave us a small conference room down the hall. No cameras, no gallery, just a narrow table and 2 chairs. Richard was already there when I walked in. He looked older, not dramatically, not enough for pity, just thinner somehow, like something essential had drained out of him. "Thank you for coming," he said. I didn't sit right away. "Say what you need to say." He swallowed. "I never meant for it to go this far." I took the chair opposite him. That's what people say when they lose control. He flinched. I'm serious. This was supposed to be clean, simple. For you, I said. He rubbed his hands together, nervous. I'd seen that gesture 100 times, usually right before he closed a deal. I can fix this, he said. We can settle. Quietly. I leaned back. You already tried that. This time is different, he insisted. I'll be generous. I almost laughed. Define generous. He named a number. It was large, life-changing even. 10 years ago, I would have been dizzy hearing it. Now I just nodded. And in return? You agree not to pursue further claims, he said quickly. No criminal referrals, no audits beyond what's already done. So, I said, you want silence. I want peace, he corrected. I looked at him. You never wanted peace. You wanted compliance. His jaw tightened. You're being emotional. There it was, the last refuge. I leaned forward. No, I'm being precise. He exhaled sharply. You don't understand what this is doing to me. I tilted my head. Try explaining it. My board is watching, he said. Investors are nervous. He gestured vaguely. This mess is damaging. I smiled faintly. Now, you know how it feels. He stared at me. You think this makes you better? No, I said. It makes me finished. He looked down at the table. For a moment, he seemed smaller, almost human. I never meant to hurt you, he said quietly. The room went very still. I felt something stir in my chest. Not forgiveness, memory. You didn't mean to hurt me, I repeated. You just didn't care if you did. He looked up. That's not fair. It's accurate, I said. You didn't plan my pain. You planned your comfort. He closed his eyes. I was under pressure. So was I replied. Every day, I disappeared a little more. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he said, if this continues, it could ruin me. I met his eyes. It already has consequences. Julia, he said softly. Please. That word, please. He hadn't used it in years. Do you know what you're asking? I said. You're asking me to clean up your mess again. I'm asking you to stop, he said, before it gets worse. I stood. I already stopped, I said. That's why this is happening. He stood too. You think walking away makes you strong. No, I said. Walking away makes me free. He reached for my arm. I stepped back. Don't, I said. He froze. You don't get to touch me when you're afraid, I continued. You lost that right. His hand dropped. I did love you, he said. I believed him. That was the tragedy. I loved you too, I said. That's why I paid attention. A knock sounded at the door. Elaine's voice. Time. Richard looked at me desperately. Last chance. I picked up my bag. For you. I opened the door. As I walked out, I heard him say, You'll regret this. I paused, turned back. No, I said. You will. Back in the courtroom, the judge reconvened. Richard sat silently now. No outbursts, no objections. The judge spoke calmly. The court has reviewed the findings. Elaine squeezed my hand once. This court finds evidence of intentional concealment, misrepresentation, and bad faith negotiation, the judge continued. Richard stared straight ahead. As such, the judge said, the prior settlement is void. A collective inhale filled the room. The judge looked at me. Mrs. Hale, do you wish to proceed? I stood. Yes, I said, not loudly, not angrily, just certain. The judge nodded. Then we will proceed to final ruling. And in that moment, I knew the story was no longer about revenge. It was about truth. finally being allowed to stand without apology. The courtroom felt different when we came back in. Quieter, not peaceful, just settled, like the storm had already chosen where to land. Richard didn't look at me this time. His lawyer whispered something urgently, but Richard barely reacted. He just stared at the bench, jaw locked, hands folded too neatly, like a man waiting for impact. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Before I issue my ruling," she said, "I want to address something directly." Ets were revealed. Everyone leaned in. "This court is not here to punish arrogance," she continued, "nor ambition. Those are human traits." Richard finally blinked. "This court is here to address deception." She turned a page. "Mr. Hale," she said, "you presented yourself as transparent, cooperative, reasonable." Richard's lawyer shifted. "The evidence shows otherwise," the judge went on. "You hid assets. You rerouted income. You attempted to strong-arm a settlement while withholding material facts." Richard's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, sit down," the judge said calmly. He sat. The room held its breath. The judge looked at me. "Mrs. Hale," she said, "you were told repeatedly that you were overreacting." A ripple moved through the gallery. "You were encouraged to be grateful," the judge continued, "to be quiet, to accept what was offered, and move on." I felt my chest tighten. "That expectation," the judge said, "was not based on fairness. It was based on underestimation." Richard's face drained of color. The judge folded her hands. "This court finds in favor of the petitioner." It didn't sound dramatic. It sounded final. Elaine exhaled sharply beside me. "The marital assets will be recalculated in full," the judge continued, "including previously concealed accounts, shell holdings, and deferred compensation." Richard's lawyer stood again. "Your Honor, that could take months." "It will take as long as it takes," the judge replied. "Additionally, this court is referring financial documentation to the appropriate regulatory bodies for further review." That did it. Richard turned. He looked at me, not angry, afraid. The judge wasn't finished. "Mrs. Hale is awarded primary ownership of the marital home," she said. 70% of liquid assets, full spousal support for a term deemed appropriate by this court." A murmur swept the room. "And," the judge added, "all legal fees incurred due to intentional obstruction will be paid by the respondent." Silence. Then the gavel. "Court is adjourned." Just like that. No applause, no gasps, just the sound of something ending. Elaine squeezed my shoulder. "You did it." I shook my head slightly. "I didn't do anything." She smiled. "Exactly." People stood, chairs scraped, reporters rushed the exits. Richard stayed seated. For a moment, I thought he might not move at all. As I gathered my things, he finally stood and stepped toward me. "Julia," he said quietly. Elaine was already alert, but I raised a hand. "It's okay," I said. Richard looked hollow. "I never thought it would end like this," he said. "I studied him. Not the man I married. The man he chose to become." "It didn't have to," I said. He nodded slowly. "I know." For the first time, there was no argument behind his eyes. No strategy. Just loss. "I hope it was worth it," he said. I considered that. Really considered it. Then I said, "It wasn't about worth. It was about stopping." He frowned. "Stopping what?" "Lying to myself," I said. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to negotiate. Outside, the sun was painfully bright. Elaine walked with me down the steps. "You okay?" I nodded. "I think so." "You don't have to be strong now," she said. "I know," I replied. But I want to stand anyway. She smiled. Go. I'll handle the rest. I stepped away. Halfway down the steps, someone called my name. I turned. It was a woman from the gallery, middle-aged, nervous. I just wanted to say, she said softly, thank you. For what? I asked. For not backing down, she said. I needed to see that. I swallowed. So did I. She nodded and walked away. I stood there a moment longer. No rush. No one pulling me in any direction. Then I took out my phone. There was a message from Richard's mother. I'm sorry for everything. I stared at it. Then I deleted it. Not out of spite, out of clarity. Some apologies arrived too late to matter. And that's okay. I drove home. My home. The house was quiet when I walked in. Sunlight across the floor. Dust in the air. I set my bag down, sat on the couch. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like waiting. It felt like space. Later, as evening settled in, my phone buzzed again. Elaine, it's officially over, I typed back. Thank you. I didn't add anything else. I didn't need to. That night, I slept deeply. No rehearsing conversations. No bracing for disappointment. Just rest. And when I woke up, there was nothing left to prove. Only a life finally returned to me.